probably 90%. Here comes the boss. 511, if you know that, we'll use that for the hymn of invitation. That is one more youngin'. 511. Because a lot of times as we study the Word of God, we get confused. We get confused because there are people who make statements that we accept as fact and never ever give them thought as to whether it is impossible for what they say to be true. The one I want to talk about tonight is pretty simple. It sounds more simple than it really is. That's the reason we'll spend the time in studying. And the question or the thing that we want to study is will man ever judge man? Now, you think about that in the way that we're going to be discussing it, and everybody's always saying, well, you're judging me. When a man is judged,
the Bible says, whether they're doing correct or not, but you do not have the final say on the judgment.
Man can never judge man. God never judges man while he is alive.
That's what I'm saying, in the flesh.
While he is alive.
Judgment is spiritual.
Judgment comes at death. So, these people that are worried about being judged have not understood that they are being judged by somebody who can't judge them. That's man. The reason that man can't judge man is that he doesn't have the power, the right, or the ability to do that. Yet, all the religious world is judged by man. Man is the one who makes the rules and regulations. Man is the one who determines what's right and wrong. And all through the living that we do here on this earth, if we're in a denomination, man judges man. Then again, if while we live on this earth, we don't become a child of God, then the world judges man. Because, you see, the world is the one who makes the rules, the stipulations, and the regulations that we're following. Somebody will say, well, I don't follow the world. I follow who I want to.
Are you talking world as the outside world or world as the church?
Outside world. The church doesn't, in the inside world, doesn't judge man. You know, I was talking to a guy today who turned 80 years old yesterday. Phenomenal health. Boy, the stories he had to tell. But the point was that all through his existence, everybody else had been his judge. The reason I said that is that when he asked me what the name of the church I preached for is, I told him the Church of Christ. He said, I've never heard of that one. Now, this is not an illiterate man. He is not an unread man. He is extremely capable in the field that he is involved in. Yet, he's been married to a pastor. He's married to a woman whose daughter is a pastor. And I said, have you never read the scriptures? Oh, I read the Bible. I like the New Testament pretty well, but the Old I don't care for. I said, if you understood the Old, you would appreciate the New. You really can't understand the New unless you have appreciation for the Old, because it is true that the Old Testament is not written by man. The Old Testament was written by an apostle who most people don't even consider to be an apostle because we don't use that name for him. The apostle that is the author of the Old Testament, including the book of Genesis, is a man by the name of Moses. Like I talked a couple of weeks ago, and if you didn't study it and have an opportunity to, you might go back and get that tape or that evening's subject. That is, Moses was not the author of the Old Testament. He did not and was not the authority, and having no authority, he was a means by which the message of the Old Testament was taught. But Moses was not the only apostle of the Old Testament. There were other apostles of the Old Testament, but in the one of which I have direct reference, there's two others, was David, the king, and John, the baptizer. These were apostles of a covenant that was changeable and changing. But the authority for the preaching and the teaching of David was not David. And the authority, of course, for John the baptizer was not John himself. Jesus, as I mentioned to you, was not a competitor of Moses. The other night when we talked about John 1:16 and 17, where the law came by Moses and grace and truth came by Jesus Christ, people have tried to let on, like particularly by some in the Church of Christ, that Jesus and Moses were competitors, that they competed one with the other. No, they didn't. It was not Moses' law. It was the law of Christ that Moses was the apostle of. It was Moses who spent 40 days and 40 nights to get his teaching and direction correct on Mount Sinai. And then he spent another 40 years directing the teaching of the children of Israel, but he was not the judge. He was just the administrator of the old covenant that Jesus Christ established amongst the Jews. In the patriarchal dispensation, man, of course, got into a position to where he judged man and made rules and regulations and went so far astray that God relinquished fellowship in any sense of the word with a lot of people in that day and time, and only got into the covenant with Abraham because Christ was coming to the world. But man does all the judging that they claim we're doing. For instance, in discussing the scriptures, this man said his daughter was sprinkled when she was 2 weeks old. Now, who gave that law? Man. Who then is judging those who obey that law or handing down a dictum or some authority that they have. And then the question is, if man judges man, who allows that man to judge them?
Back in the day, it was the Romans that gave that law strength. The Romans that judged.
The Roman Catholic Church? Well, of course, that's where it first started. If you read history, I think it was around the middle of the 2nd century, where a man was supposed to be been dying, and while he was leaving this life, they determined that he was too sick to immerse, and so the head of the religious assembly at that time gave them the authority to sprinkle water on them. And it didn't take hold until about the 8th century when it became a rule of the Roman Catholic Church. But again, Roman Catholicism.
They sprinkle people that don't even know what they're being sprinkled.
The Roman Catholics?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, of course, babies wouldn't.
Yeah, and maybe don't know why they're getting water poured on and makes them mad.
That's just distraction. They don't know what sin is. It's true.
Who determines the law of the Roman Catholic Church? The Pope. The Pope is not God. He doesn't even look like him. He says he's God on the earth, but he doesn't. Now, somebody says, well, you're the enemy of the Pope. Yeah, I'm the natural enemy of the Pope if I allow him to destroy my soul and deliver it in hell, because I'm...
You ask how it could be judged. The truth that the Word of God prevents another man from laying his judgment on you. So the judgment doesn't count. Unless you know the truth of the Scripture, the truth of God.
So the fact is that man cannot judge man. It's not been established because all of these denominations judge their people. The Baptists judge their people by telling them that Jesus lied, and they get away with it. I was listening to a discussion between the First Baptist Church preacher in Dallas, Texas, I guess it is, and some imam of the Islamic faith. And the First Baptist Church preacher was trying to enforce his law, his belief, his understanding of God on the imam. And I looked at the TV and I said, well, neither one of you know him. One's no more lost than the other. You see, we don't look at it that way. We think that these people are Confederates in arms, that they would fly to the aid and the relief of anybody who is a true child of God anytime they would be attacked by someone outside what they call Christendom, whatever animal that is. Yet when they are confronted with each other, it really is something that is a stark revelation that you see just two old men, and neither of them have the authority to bind and loose the law of God on the sons of men. Now, does Jesus judge? Then who is the judge? Turn to the book of John, the 7th chapter. And let's start with verse 16. Jesus, while he was here on the earth, did not come here to judge. He said, I came not to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. In verse 16, are you in John 7:16? Jesus answered them and said, my doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me. If any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. He that speaketh of himself seeketh his own glory. But he that seeketh his glory that sent him, the same is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. Then he asked the question, did not Moses give you the law? Well, Moses gave them the law, but Moses was not the authority behind the law. But if you'll talk to any Jew today, and they'll tell you about the Torah, they'll let on like that Moses was the lawgiver. Moses was the apostle through which the Old Testament covenant was given. The apostle, one who is sent. And of course, he was sent with this message. And it took him a while to get this message straight. That's the reason he was 40 days and 40 nights in the mountain. Yet, I've always been amazed, and so I'll go ahead and include this point again. I've always been amazed with a lot of people because they think Moses was kind of dumb. How dumb was Moses? It took him 40 days and 40 nights in a mountain to come up with 10 commandments. That's kind of slow. I mean, when you stop to think about it, if that's all the boy did in 40 days and 40 nights, he wasn't the sharpest blade on the lawnmower, was he? What did Moses do on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights? Well, of course, he received the law that we call the Ten Commandments. Now, the Old Testament does not call it that, by the way. We do. It is not called that in the Hebrew language either. But Moses received this law. But what was Moses doing that whole time in the mountain? Fiddled his time away, trying to figure out how to write on stone. Somebody says, man, if anybody's going to write something on stone, it's going to take a while to etch it in. But who wrote the commandments the first time they were written on the stone? God did, by his finger. Now, of course, we don't get into a lot of times what the finger of God is. I assume, think that God literally took his finger and took 2 tablets of stone. By the way, who cut the tablets? How come they came out to be just 2? You know why? He wrote small. Now that one I've never heard of. Why were there 2? Anytime in the old ancient days there was a covenant.
2 or 3 together.
No. Why was there 2? Huh? Well, he broke both of them at the same time. And you know what? You know what he did with that broken stone?
You're saying there were 2 tablets with 10 on each one.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Why 2?
Double witness, I guess.
Well, that's yes, but what does that mean? Was there any distinction at that time? The reason it was 2, in those days when there was a covenant made, because there was no other way to bind it, they made 2 copies, one for each part of the covenant. Now, of course, God didn't need to keep his. He wrote it. But according to the covenant pattern of the people of that time, there were 2 that were made. But what did Moses do the whole time he was in the mountain?
Being instructed by God.
To do just 10 commandments? It took God that much time to beat that through Moses' brain? No, sir. To whom? How could he do that? The law is still true then as it is now. God does not hear the prayer of a sinner. What good would it have done Moses to pray?
They didn't have law yet, he wasn't a sinner.
Sir?
They didn't have law yet, he wasn't.
No, sir, he did. No, sir, that's not true. No, sir, that's not true. What was the purpose of the law? To define sin. It doesn't matter if you don't know it's not supposed to be 80 miles an hour through a 30-mile school zone. Huh? Hillary has no law that she goes by. Turn to the book of Hebrews, the 10th chapter. I'm going to show you what Moses was doing while he was in the mountain, and I'm going to show you why it took him so long to get it, because there was so much of it to get. Let's start with verse 1. For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, can never, with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. What was the purpose of Moses as Christ was teaching him on the mountain? To establish the pattern of the Church of Christ. That's exactly what he was doing. You say, well, that wouldn't take that long, would it? I don't know. I've been studying the scriptures pretty continuously for 50 years. How much do you think I don't know? You don't have to answer that question, but that's not the point. What about these people who claim to be a purveyor of the law of Moses, or the law of God, or the testament of Jesus Christ, and not know anything about it? Turn to the 8th chapter, the first 2 or 3 verses. You know, what's interesting about the book of Hebrews, if you've never figured it out, is if you could memorize the first 4 verses of each chapter, you'd have the book of Hebrews down pat. We'll go back to Hebrews 3 in a few minutes, 1 through 4, and I'll show you. And we can go to the rest of them. All right, look here. Now the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. This is the totality. This is what was always intended for it to be instructed. We have a high priest which is set on the right hand of the throne of his majesty in the heavens, a minister of his sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. You see, Jesus started his church. He pitched a tabernacle. What's a tabernacle? It was a place of dwelling. It was a house in which he would assemble. It was that he would bring about a means by which he would greet every first day of the week those who would be obedient to him. All right, let's keep going. He was a minister of the sanctuary, the true tabernacle that he started. This word pitched means rose up, brought into reality, brought about into existence. Why and what did Jesus bring into existence? The Church of Christ. Now look at the 4th verse. For if he were on earth, he could not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law. So what then serves the example of the shadow of heavenly things? What was the purpose of Moses establishing the law that he is given record to as instructing? The answer to that is that he was given this as a means of teaching instruction. Let's look. What serves then the example of the shadow of heavenly things? A shadow of always is something that is not the reality. It is something that is a picture, or something that looks like, or something that you could look at and see something that would be like it when you really came into his presence. So what the thing that Moses was there to do was to receive the pattern of the Church of Christ, or as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern shown to thee in the mount. Moses was on the Mount of Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights because Jesus was giving him the pattern of the sanctuary, the place where he would dwell, the thing that he had already predetermined before the foundations of the world to bring into existence. There was only one that he was going to bring into existence, and that was his church. Now, let's keep going. But now he obtained a more excellent ministry, but by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. For if the first covenant had been found faultless, then there should have been no place sought for the second. For finding fault with them, that is the first covenant, he said, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. Where was it that God made this covenant with the Jew? At Mount Sinai. Where was it that the Christ spoke and his voice was so loud that it was so thunderous that the people begged Moses to go into the tent to meet God so he could turn down the loudspeakers because it was hurting their ears? So he says, I made this covenant in the day when I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my ways, or not in my covenant, and I regarded them not. In other words, they were not something that was what I was looking for. But this is the covenant now that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts. And I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And as this is written, he says, they shall no longer teach every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. And I'll be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and the iniquities will I remember no more. What was Moses then doing in the mountain? Receiving the pattern of the New Testament church. You want to see something that will help you to understand the New Testament church? Then go back and look at the pattern. And when you look at the pattern, you will see that Moses was there to do. Now, it took him 40 days and 40 nights. It really did. It was a very extensive teaching and instruction. It is something that had never been brought into the realm of understanding of mankind. It was something so far different than man had ever determined that he would know that this was from God. Now, all of the judges of the world today have ignored God. They have made up their own rules and regulations. They have determined that they are the ones who have the authority. And you see, when you bring up something that's contradictory to what they call their faith, they are actually telling you the truth. It is theirs. And then they tickle me. They'll say, well, you're judging me. No, you're the one that's trying to judge me. And because you're trying to judge me, you're making laws and rules and regulations. This old boy said, why don't you come over some night and we'll study the Bible? You bring your wife and I'll get my wife and we'll go to dinner and you all can talk about the Bible. I said, he said, do you think you could get along with her? I said, it's not me that will be her problem. I get along with everybody. And most generally that's true. Well, he said, what's going to be the problem? I said, well, we'll have one verse of scripture that right off she won't agree to. He said, and what verse of scripture would that be? Because they piddle in speaking in tongues, and they go to the altar to pray, and they do all these other things. I said, Paul said, I suffer not a woman to teach, not to usurp authority over the man, but to learn in silence. He said, yeah, you're right. So you won't get along with her on that one. Well, is it my fault? But they are saying we're judging them, when it's God that has given us the rules. Now, you're right. There is something called fruit. You know, when you feed somebody something, it's a fruit. Now, if you turn to 1 John 4:1, you'll see that the fruit of the judgment of God is what the Church of Christ has been taught to elicit or to teach throughout the world. 4:1 and 2.
Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world.
You know what this word try there means? Take them and,
Whether it's true.
yeah. And when you're going to try something, so if you go to buy a car, they'll say, would you like to drive it? Would you like to try it out? Well, when you study the New Testament and the New Testament pattern is something that these people have never, ever tried out. I don't know if they like it or not. This old boy told me, he says, I've been in the Pentecostal church. I've been in the Baptist church. I've been in, bless his heart, he's been married 4 times. He said, I've been in the Presbyterian church. And he said, I've been in 2 or 3 more. I don't know. He'd been in enough churches where he could have been called United Brethren, because he was amongst all of them. But he had never, ever heard of the Church of Christ.
Obviously, he's driving down the road blind. That's scary.
Or when he was reading or having it read to him, it was distributed to him in a way so that he would not catch on.
I believe that.
And they do that very eloquently a lot of times. And the fact is that we have come into a world that man judges man, but claims that Christ judges man. Now, Christ came in to the world to seek and to save that was lost. What had been lost? Somebody will say, well, that's the Jewish people. Yeah? And whose Bible does it say that? The thought of which Christ came into existence to begin had been lost to the world. What was the first teaching that God did when he brought man into existence? He married Adam to Eve. People just don't understand that marriage is a thing that God brought into existence, but nobody knows who Eve is. Now, if you'd have gone up to Adam and said, I think you're kind of cocky when you think that you're to be married to one woman and but one, they would be insulting. But how many wives did Adam have? One and but one. What was the expression that God stated in the marriage of Adam and Eve? Yeah. What I have joined together, let not man put asunder. What is it that had put asunder or had taken out of the realm of discussion the fact that Christ came to establish or purchase or find or teach that which had been lost? And that was, he was to establish a church. Now, in the New Testament, we're going to find a lot of parables. and one of the favorite ones I have, and I've always loved this one. If you go back to the book of Luke, I believe it is the 13th chapter, you will see that Jesus talked about the pearl of great price. Now, the pearl of great price, first of all, a pearl was far more valuable in those days than gold. The pearl of great price was something that this man came from a different planet, a different place, a different situation to bring into existence. Are you with me? Luke, the 13th chapter. Is it? Yeah. Matthew 13, thank you. What is it that Jesus came to purchase? Right. And so, and I keep getting into trouble with my brethren because they don't understand John 3:16. Now, if you bring John 3:16 into the thought of Matthew 13, you will see. What is it that Christ came to purchase? The pearl of great price. What is it that John 3:16 says? God so loved the church that he gave himself for it. And I've already shown you many times that it is the favorite pronoun that Jesus uses for the church. So, I'm sorry, not her, it. When you say this is it, this is the it. This is the highest can ever go. This is the greatest that it can ever be. There is nothing compared to it. Now, talking about Adam and Eve, go to Ephesians 5. And I'll show you exactly what the Apostle Paul said to the Church of Christ at Ephesus. In Ephesians 5, we're going to start with verse 26. Now you notice he's going to sanctify and cleanse what? It. Exactly. Notice that little word, it. Keep going. Now wait a minute. What's he going to present to himself? The it. Sure, the church. Keep going.
Glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle, such a thing. That it should be holy without blemish.
All right, he's going to forgive it of its sins. Keep going.
So ought men to love their wives as their own body. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourished it, and cleansed and cherished it.
Okay. So the church, without any question or doubt, is the it. Keep going.
For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, that I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband.
All right. She pays attention to and shows respect to his commandment.
Wouldn't this be the answer to the great mystery that people are always talking about? The great mystery.
Well, of course, the great mystery was the Gentile coming into the church and being equal in the church. If you want to look at the 3rd chapter, you can see that right quickly.
Well, what I was thinking when I was reading this is that it says that this is the great mystery. The Church of Christ being perfect, non-blemished.
No, but what would the church of Christ be? The Jew and the Gentile in peace because of the forgiveness of sin. So anytime you read about the it, you're referring to the church. And I love this, so let's go over and do it. In the book of Revelation, the 21st chapter. And let's start with verse 22.
And I saw no temple therein. The Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it.
Now, wait a minute. I want you to emphasize 22. Yeah, 21, 22. Chapter 21, verse 22. All right, do it again. Now, if you want to, and you own the Bible you brought with you, circle the word "it," and you'll count when we get done. Keep going. All right, the temple means the place of dwelling. They don't need a house because this is his house. Keep going. There we go.
Nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut off at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination, or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the book of life.
Keep going. No, keep going. Verse 20, chapter 22. Just because them boys stopped, the Lord didn't.
He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river was there the tree of life, which bears 12 manner of fruit and yieldeth her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. There shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it. And his servants shall serve him.
See, it's just a natural thing to read and run off with the fact it is not important. Because it's in it. It's like it's just not, that's not the name of anything. But this is what's being, we'll read the next two verses.
There shall be no night there, and they need no candle, by the light of the sun. The Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. He said unto me, these things are faithful and true, and the Lord God of holy prophets sent his angels to show unto his servants things which must be done shortly after.
All right. So the it is what Jesus came to purchase. It's what he came to bring into existence. I was driving with a guy one time. I said, do you know why Christ came to the earth? He said, no. Do you? I said, yeah. He said, why did he come to the earth? I said, to get married. Yeah. He said, I never heard of that. I said, well, that's the reason he came. Let's turn to Romans 7 and 4. Yeah.
Wherefore, my brethren, you also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ. You should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit.
All right. So we are married to Christ, married to him in his church. It is the church that he calls together in the marriage supper of the Lamb to partake of the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week. Now, here's the thing that I wanted to save till last. God never judges until death. You got all that time to make preparations for the next type of existence. You are not condemned or damned or doomed while you are alive. You can change. That is a biblical term, repent. And this change takes place when you're baptized into Christ for the remission of sins. And at death's door, judgment comes. Once that judgment has been distributed, it will never be reversed. And unless you're in the Lord's church, unless you've been baptized into Christ for the remission of sins, you've never been married to Christ. What would you think about being invited into the family of God? What do they call the church? Mrs. Christ? Well, basically, that's what we call it when it's called the Church of Christ, because she's married to him. What other religious institution do you know that wears anything in its name about Christ? Now, the Roman Catholic does. They call themselves the Holy Roman Church of Christ. But what they say and what they do is completely different. But denominationalism doesn't even try to determine that. So the judge of man has been man. And they will not allow Jesus nor his words to judge him. Turn to John 12:48.
John 12:48.
Yeah, start with verse 45.
And it says, and he that seeth me seeth him that sent me. I am come a light into the world, that whosoever believeth on me should not abide in darkness. And if any man hear my words and believe not, I judge him not, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world.
All right, so if Christ didn't come to judge the world, but to save it, who judges the world? Exactly. And that is the secret that you call a mystery that a lot of people have not learned. I didn't come to judge the world. I came to save it. I came to buy the pearl of great price. I came to get married to the church. I came for it. And this is always a good, and I like it. So Matthew 16. When Peter is said to have made the most phenomenal statement that mankind couldn't come up with, but it had to come from God the Father. In Matthew 16, start 18.
He said, and I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.
All right. Jesus said, I will build my church. And the gates of hell, which is what? Well, the church is the pearl of great price, pearl of great price. But what is the gate? What are the gates of death? What are the gates of death? That's the gates of death. Because if man would have understood this, they would have never wondered where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were, because being separated, they weren't in the church. Had they not been separated, they would have been in the church. But Jesus said, I came to save them and to not allow them to spend eternity in separation. If you're here and subject to the invitation of the gospel, Jesus still teaches, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Will you come as we stand and sing?